welcome to GreenFleet Talks. My name is Kate Armitage and I'm hosting our discussion this morning, and I'm delighted to be joined again by Kevin Ledger, who's EV sales specialist at Drax Energy Solutions. Good morning, Kevin.
Hi there, Kate. Lovely to be here with you again today.
Well, indeed, nice to see you again. You've gone from being a reluctant participant to a regular at the GreenFleet events, Kevin, which is a delight. So welcome.
I'm sure it is a delight, Kate, for you. I'm quite sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I would say that I'm not reluctant, but I'm always happy to try and challenge myself and see how we get on.
Good. You'll give it your best shot, which is all we can ask. Kevin, you and I saw each other a couple of weeks ago at the latest GreenFleet Roundtable. We had great discussions, and one of the topics that we discussed in detail and really came to life was the importance of collecting fleet data and then, of course, generating the insights from that, and the important role that artificial intelligence has in that whole process. So kind of by way of summary, how important do you think it is to utilize data and technology when moving over to electric vehicles?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think that for me that round table really did kind of bring to life the kind of data that people are looking at on a day-to-day basis, and people that are making decisions around kind of their EV fleets. And it's certainly, like I said, again, for me, it kind of really did push the point that the data is incredibly important when people start to make decisions. And it doesn't have to be, huge amounts of data. It could be some quite simple data, but data nevertheless. I think having some good telematics data can really provide some, incredible insight into the way that fleets move around, the way that people use their vehicles when they have downtime, so you could very quickly and easily identify vehicles that might be best suited to EV. But also data is, and I think we saw this with a couple of our guests at the round table, can really be used to bring colour to the way that people are using the EV charge points. And I think that once we've kind of got that colour and you've kind of got that understanding, that can really help make an actual informed decision about when and where to put these points and the types of speeds that will actually really suit their kind of day-to-day life, because ultimately we don't want this to be a challenge for people. We want to make their lives easier.
Yeah.
And, that colour can really inform that decision.
Yeah, and to avoid potentially over-investing, so overbuilding the infrastructure or potentially putting the wrong types of charge points in as well. So it's really valuable, both in that decision-making process to switch to EVs, but actually during the life of the infrastructure as well, you can get real value from it.
Yeah, absolutely. As you've rightly pointed out there, sticking in banks and banks of ultra rapid EV charging for fleets that are coming into base for 6-7 hours is a waste of investment. Absolutely. Look to increase the number of AC EV bays rather than putting in, multiples of DC bays. More bang for your buck, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, Kevin, Drax electric vehicles, you are the kind of infrastructure expert, so you've seen this many times. You've got loads of experience in deploying workplace and depot charging. So given your position and your insights, what would you say are the top kind of 3 factors that fleet managers should be considering before they embark on an infrastructure project?
Yeah, I think to kind of maybe draw on my own experience there, I'm very lucky to be able to get out and meet these people on a day-to-day basis to kind of understand what their thoughts and feelings are, the way that their sort of minds are thinking about how they deploy what is a relatively new technology for some people. And I think, the first thing that you really need to do, the thing that you need to sort of hone in on is why you're doing it. Kind of identify your key drivers and your key stakeholders in this kind of plan, the way that you're going to map. work out in your mind if it is sustainability. Is that the reason that you're doing it for the green element? Or, let's be honest, is it because you just want to save some money? Potentially you're going to be looking at different types of vehicles that require less maintenance. If you can support depot charging, then potentially, big reductions in cost on your fuel. So I think that's really key. So once you've kind of got that idea about why you're doing it, you then need to kind of then sort of focus in on your kind of operational requirements. What's the day-to-day requirement for your fleet? What works best for your fleet? Is it coming back to base and 6-7 hours dwell time? Is it much shorter visits with a combination of, say, for example, home charging for fleet drivers, where people are lucky enough to have drives? So that's always an option. We could even be talking about, very not basic, but things that need to be taken into consideration, things like the health and safety on your sites. If operationally you require all of your vehicles to come back to home, they all need to be reverse parked. Those type of operational factors can have a big implication on the type of EV charging infrastructure that you want to phase out, sort of push out into your depots. And then finally, when you've got a good grasp of why you're doing it, and you've got an idea of how your fleet is working, and again, I'll refer back to the round table discussions. We had it several times. Cost is clearly a big factor out there in the marketplace. So, don't be afraid of cost. Make sure that we understand it, and we can set out the aspirations of your business based on the cost and based on the budgets that you have available. There's always something that generally can be done, but getting that basic level of understanding first off is really key.
Yep, I agree, Kevin, and I think realistically understanding what the total cost of ownership is a really important benchmark for you to then judge your success criteria by. One of the things that may help that total cost of ownership is the government's new depot charging scheme, albeit modest. So does it go far enough? First question. And then the second question is, in your opinion, is there anything else that the government could or should be doing to accelerate EV adoption?
Yeah, I mean, it's another good question. It's one that's kind of starting to make its way, kind of creep into conversations that we're now starting to have on a day-to-day basis here at Drax. I think a lot of people are aware of kind of Levi, what that's done for, or what it's now starting to do for the public charging infrastructure. Local authorities are really starting to leap forward now with that, and that's great news. I think for me, does the depot charging scheme go far enough? I think at the moment, obviously, it's quite restricted on time, it's quite restricted on budget. But what I will say is that we're starting to have conversations where, with our clients, potentially projects have got stuck. So this is basically provided that key to get those projects unstuck. And that's nothing but great news, right? That just means that somebody else is moving forward, starting to be out there in the community with their EV vans, with their EV vehicles. They'll love to talk about it. And rightly so, because, these are big projects that are kind of moving forward with pace. To ask the question, is there more that can be done? I think maybe expanding that into blue light, into public, into public commercial fleets would be really useful. Big fleet operators there with a lot of public vehicles that are seen out there. People see them, people notice them. So being able to push that forward would be fab. And for me, I just think pushing that date out, let's keep it going whilst we're starting to get that momentum, and just keep it going, get on board with it and just really start to push forward with it.
Yeah, and it is great to hear that actually that additional bit of funding is starting to push these projects over the line. Like you say, just kind of freeing up some of the barriers is great to hear. And I guess that's kind of the evidence that the government will be looking for at some point when they decide whether or not they're going to extend or roll out that funding. How obviously you're all about energy, and one of my favorite expressions is more and more the fleet manager is becoming an energy manager. So how important is it to consider energy at the very start of this process?
Yeah, I think there's no doubt about it that the deployment of an EV fleet, deployment of EV charging infrastructure can be energy intensive. So I think going back to those sort of top points when you start to look at your kind of operational factors, kind of understanding what your energy is doing now, how it's being used, and then the potential for that energy into the future is hugely important when we start to talk about EV. Clearly energy can be a blocker, in the sense that you just might not have that capacity. But if you've got that capacity, I guess where a company like Drax comes in is that we can make the best use of what you've got. But equally being able to support you moving forward, that if you want to have a look at getting additional energy, the support of IDNOs and ICPs is something that, we can support with as a company. So it's incredibly important to get that right, to make sure that your aspirations are met right now to get you off the ground, but then also to be able to move forward. I think you mentioned it earlier, being able to move forward is key, because it just means that you don't need to go out and do everything all at once. It just means that you can take those baby steps and move forward on a much slower pace that suits your fleet, suits what you were trying to do. And being informed about energy will make that whole process so much simpler.
Yeah, great advice. And I think your point about baby steps is a very good one, because it's not straightforward, and there is a lot of learning that is going on within the fleet environment around this. So don't be overwhelmed by all of the great things that, the vehicle to grid and all of those great things. Start with the basics, take your baby steps. The end goal, of course, is ideally, if you have a fully electric fleet, you are much better able to control the cost of the running of that fleet. You're not susceptible in the same way as you may be at the price of the pump, because you've got other ways of creating value from that infrastructure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And creating value from that infrastructure is a really, it's one of those key points that I think that was brought up not only at our roundtable, but also in places like the recent EV summit.
Yeah.
The ability for people to potentially be able to share depots, share kind of resource to be able to sort of progress EV as a whole, I think is really, really key. And like you say, if you can generate additional revenue from that EV infrastructure, you're starting to get a return on your investment. And then it's not all about pure capex, it's about actually getting a return, as well as supporting the sustainability points and the kind of green agenda that your company might have.
Yeah, really 100%. That is a whole other podcast, Kevin. So I'd like to invite you back to talk about monetizing your infrastructure and this whole phenomenon of infrastructure sharing, which is going to be huge, I think, particularly in the HGV space. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Kevin. Thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you, Kate, and thanks for having me back. But yeah, I certainly look forward to the next one.
Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you, of course, to Drax Energy Solutions for joining GreenFleet Talks. That is about all we've got time for. Tune in again. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.